This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there.
From Innistrad to Shadowmoor, what spooky top 10 does Nitsuhone have in store?
Hello everyone, I'm Nitsuhone, and it is Friday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. As my special Halloween intro probably just clued you in, this is another Halloween-inspired MTG Top 10. All of them in the month of October have followed and are going to follow that theme. Last year during October, I looked at the best reanimation spells in the game. This time around, we're looking at reanimation targets. Reanimator decks are entirely built around getting a creature into the graveyard and then getting that creature into play for an incredibly discounted rate. Bringing the dead back to life, either accidentally or intentionally, is a common trope in horror movies, so I thought it was a nice fit for an October MTG Top 10. Anyway, reanimation targets tend to have high mana costs and be incredibly powerful, but be very difficult to cast in most scenarios. In this video, we're going to look at the 10 cards from Magic's history that have been targets of reanimation spells the most at the game's highest level. The methodology for this video is a bit different than others. Usually my top 10 simply look at how many Pro Tour or Mythic Championship or Grand Prix top 8s an individual card has had, regardless of what type of deck it was in. This time though, I only counted appearance that the cards on this list had in reanimation decks. Other than that, the methodology is the same, as I have used the usual scoring method, which I will remind you of now. Pro Tour and Mythic Championship top 8s, as well as Legacy and Vintage Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix top 8 is worth 1 point. Now, let's get to number 10. At number 10, I have Spirit of the Night, which is a pretty fitting place to begin, because it was part of the first competitive Reanimator deck. Like most of the cards on this list, hard casting Spirit of the Night is a challenge, but boy is he powerful. He's basically impossible to block effectively because of his 3 keyword abilities, and he can attack right away, and he even has protection from black, so some removal spells don't even work on him. When he was printed way back in Mirage, he was arguably the most powerful creature in the game, at least in a vacuum. In other words, if he was on the table, there weren't really any other creatures that were better, but that high mana cost was supposed to hold him in check. That didn't work out though, because while Spirit of the Night was in Standard, so too was Recurring Nightmare. At Worlds in 1998, 4 recurring survival decks made the top 8, and all of them had bringing back Spirit of the Night as one of their primary win conditions. These days, Spirit of the Night has really been outmuscled by more powerful creatures, and as a result, it really only had its brief moment in the sun way back in 1998. At number 9 is Hornet Queen. She's the smallest creature to make this list in terms of stats, by a lot. But the Queen brings a ton of value to the battlefield in the form of her insect tokens. The fact they all have Death Touch means you can conceivably get a 5-for-1 with Insect Queen. That is, if you have to be defensive. You can also just swing away in the sky, too. Hornet Queen was most frequently reanimated by Whip of Erebos, which only gave the creature a single turn to be in play, but Hornet Queen is an ideal creature to reanimate this way since her 4 insect tokens stick around either way. Hornet Queen found all of her success in Standard because in non-rotating formats, as we're going to see going up this list, there are far more powerful options. At number 8, I have Akroma, Angel of Wrath, who upon her printing supplanted Spirit of the Night as arguably the most powerful creature in the game. She's bigger, and she has more keyword abilities and more protection. As a result of all that power, she was the primary reanimation target for Reanimator decks in Extended, where she was frequently brought back by both Reanimate and Exhume. That is, until Dredge decks arrived on the scene, at which point that's where she primarily saw play as a singleton copy in Icarid decks, which, like most Dredge decks, could rapidly fill the graveyard. In those decks, multiple Icarids could come back from the graveyard, and then Dread Return was cast from the graveyard to bring back Akroma. It has been a while since anyone has reanimated her at Magic's highest level of competition though, since she hasn't put up any points in over 10 years. At number 7, it's Phantom Shobha. The Shobha is a 7-mana 7/7 with trample and pseudo lifelink that also doesn't die to damage. Instead, he just loses a +1/+1 counter anytime he's damaged. That is all really annoying since he will continue to gain life and be a large creature for a while, even if you can block him. Even if your opponent eventually does find a kill spell to take down the Shobha, generally it will have given you enough value in life and damage that you have time to find another reanimation spell and reanimation target before they can kill you. He saw a bit of play in Standard, but found the most success in Extended, where more powerful reanimation spells were available, like the aforementioned Reanimate and Exhume. At number 6, I have Craterhoof Behemoth, a large creature with haste who pumps your whole board and gives it trample. Reanimating him, if you have any board presence at all, is often enough to win the game on the spot. He was played in more ramp-oriented reanimation decks that ran a lot of mana dorks so that they could quickly cast a reanimation spell, and all those mana dorks also got bigger when you brought him back, which again was often enough to do lethal right away. And number 5 is Angel of Serenity, who not only gives you a big flying body, but also exiles 3 of your opponent's creatures. They can also go after cards in the graveyard, so maybe it's useful in the mirror too. She has a massive impact on any board she comes down on, and reanimating her on like turn 4 is usually backbreaking for the opponent because you put them so behind on board while putting a huge threat in play. Like many cards on this list, she was frequently brought back by Unburial Rites while she was in Standard. Unburial Rites was a spell of choice for those decks because, unlike most reanimation spells, where it kind of sucks if you mill it into your graveyard, this one has flashback and still can be cast from there. At number 4 is Iona, Shield of Emeria. Iona not only gives you a huge flyer that can win the game in the air in 3 short turns, she also turns off a good chunk of your opponent's deck, since she stops all the spells they might try to cast of the color you name. This is obviously a very effective way to hamstring your opponent, especially if your opponent happens to be running removal spells mostly of one color in their deck because, hey, she's going to stay in play. Iona became a key card in Gifts Ungiven control decks in Modern. While these decks were perhaps more control-oriented than most reanimation decks we've talked about so far, this deck sought to win the game still, primarily through reanimating Iona or another creature who we've yet to meet on this list. This is because if you cast Gifts Ungiven and grab only 2 cards, let's say Iona and Unburial Rites, your opponent is in a lose-lose situation. It doesn't really matter whether your opponent puts them in your graveyard or your hand, because Iona is going to be coming back. Back in the days of Extended, she was in Dredge Reanimator as well. Legacy, though, is where Iona is at her best, since those formats have access to more powerful ways to mill yourself and more powerful ways to reanimate creatures. Decks there can bring Iona back as early as turn 2 with cards like Reanimate or Exhume. You really don't want to see Iona looking back at you from your opponent's side of the table that early. She's still seeing play in Legacy Reanimator decks today, and she's going to continue to. At number 3, we're going old school with Verdant Force, who, like Spirit of the Night, was one of the most powerful creatures in the game in the early days of Magic, where creatures on average were considerably weaker than they are today. The Force brings a huge body, and the key thing is the ability to churn out a Saproling token every upkeep, which, yes, includes the upkeeps of your opponent. If the Force is left in play, even for a couple of turns, you're going to be in really good shape, even if they kill it. Like Spirit of the Night, Verdant Force was played in standard recurring Nightmare decks. Unlike Spirit of the Night, Verdant Force also found success outside of the year 1998. In Extended in the early 2000s, Verdant Force is one of the best creatures to reanimate, as evidenced by the fact that Mono Black Reanimator, Blue Black Reanimator, and Angry Ghoul Reanimator all sought to get Verdant Force out of the graveyard and into play quickly. The Force was eventually supplanted by Akroma, who was then supplanted by Iona, and the top 2 cards on this list as the game's most powerful reanimation target, so the Force hasn't seen play since 2001. At number 2, I have Grissle Brand, who I actually figured would be number 1, but nope, he's only number 2. Grissle Brand is absurdly strong and can quickly turn a game around for you thanks to a huge body and lifelink, but the card draw effect is what really pushes Grissle Brand to be one of the most powerful creatures in the entire game of Magic. Drawing 7 cards for 7 life is insanely strong, especially because Grissle Brand can gain you back that 7 life as soon as it does combat damage. This means you can easily rip through your library to find a plan B to kill your opponent with, in case they manage to take down Grissle Brand. But even if they do kill the demon, most of the time you're going to still be able to draw 7 cards, and that's going to put your opponent super behind for the rest of the game. Grissle Brand was played in some standard Unburial Rites decks, but non-rotating formats have been where Grissle Brand has been the most impressive. In Modern, he used to be played in Gift's control decks just like Iona, but more recently he has found his way into instant Reanimator decks, which use Goryo's Vengeance to get the demon out of the graveyard on turn 2, and he's able to swing right away, meaning he's also able to draw you a ton of cards right away too. The plan there is to find another Goryo's Vengeance so you can keep things going until your opponent is dead, because Goryo's Vengeance only keeps Grissle Brand in play for a turn. Bringing Grissle Brand back from the dead with Reanimation spell is even a frightening thing to do in the Eternal formats. In both formats, he can be reanimated from a well-stocked Dredge graveyard. In Legacy, he also sees play in more traditional Reanimator decks looking to exploit Reanimate and Exhume, two cards we've mentioned a lot in this video. And at number 1 is Ellis Norn, which probably doesn't come as a surprise to anybody, at least after it was clear that Grissle Brand was number 2. Ellis Norn makes your whole board incredibly frightening and imposing, while simultaneously weakening and frequently killing many of your opponent's creatures. This usually means Ellis Norn has a big impact on the board, whether killed right away or not, much like Grissle Brand. This fact is what makes the two of them the most appealing reanimation targets in the entire game. In Standard, it saw some play in the already mentioned several times on Burial Rites deck. In Modern, Ellis Norn has seen play in Gift's control decks alongside Iona, and in Legacy and Vintage, Ellis Norn has seen play in pretty much the same decks as Grissle Brand, Dredge, and Reanimator. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. I will be back on Wednesday with another Halloween-themed list, one that is, at least tangentially, related to this one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, including several Halloween-inspired ones, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.